Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and in this video we're going to be going over my top 10 solo dungeon crawlers. We need to update this list because the last time I did this video was in 2018. So it's actually kind of cool because we'll have a reference point from that 2018 video, which I'll link in the top right hand corner right now. You can go check that out if you want to watch the whole thing, and then come back here and see my revised list, or you can stick around right here, right now, and I'll give you a summary of the top 10 really fast, just whipping right through them without showing anything on screen, and then I'll actually walk you through the 10 that I have currently slotted in. Of course, there's going to be changes to this list. There's going to be entries that disappear completely, there's going to be shuffling of position, and there's going to be new entries as well. But either way, I hope it gives you a good point of reference as to the ones that are top of my list currently. So without further ado, let's go through those 10. In the 10th position from 2018 was Zombicide Black Plague and Zombicide Green Horde. Both of those sat in the 10th position. At the number 9 position was Deep Madness. Number 8 was Fire Team 0. Number 7 was Star Wars Imperial Assault. Number 6 was Sword and Sorcery. 5 was Folklore the Affliction. 4 was Shadows of Brimstone. 3 was Kingdom Death Monster, 2 was Mansions of Madness, and number 1 sitting at the top was Gloomhaven. One last thing to mention, but it's very important so you understand the context of how this actual list came to be, is the 2018 version of this video, and this one for 2019 isn't specific to the year at all. So it doesn't have to be a board game from 2019 only to be on this list. It's literally anything that's been released to date could land on this current list for the top 10 solo board games. So just wanted to clear that up in case there's any confusion, because when we go into this next list, there's going to be a number of dungeon crawlers from different years, and that's a-okay. This list is something I like to do annually in order to kind of update the games that I consider to be in my top 10. In the 10th position, we have Sword and Sorcery from Arius Games, coming out in 2017. It's rated 49 thematically, very, very high. Overall, very successful. Honestly, being in the top 500 for board games is actually quite impressive, being that there are thousands and thousands and thousands out there. So it is definitely a highly ranked game. It's well known, and there's lots of miniatures. There's lots of gameplay. It's a dungeon crawler. One of the coolest things I like about it is the tiered colored kind of look to the different monsters, so you know exactly which ones are kind of going to come at you a little harder than the others. That's very nice because you don't have to paint them out of the box. Another thing I really like is the fact that if you do happen to paint them, they look absolutely gorgeous. Plus, on top of the fact, the actual artwork and style of the tiles themselves is beautiful. The gameplay flows really nicely once you get used to it. And that's going to tie into my con, but I'll talk about that in a second. But basically, the game looks really good, plays really well, and the epic epic fantasy adventure that it presents itself as is bang on. It gives you that sense of a purpose to want to come back and finish and progress in the story. The story is linear, but there's forks in the road and decisions to be made as you go along. Plus, your character has choices to make in terms of its direction or path, which also open up the doors to lots of interesting and unique choices along the way. So you could come back and replay this and do some things in a different way, which is kind of cool. So again, this one still stays on my list because they're still supporting it as well, and I really enjoy it. So there's more content coming for this game from recent Kickstarters as well. The con I want to talk about is the fiddliness of this one. So definitely in terms of the amount of content that's actually in the game, there's quite a bit of fiddliness. So I'm going to try and find an actual picture here of the table itself, because some of these are actually more so, looks like they've actually set them up on like a, that's pretty crazy. They set up full 3D scenery and stuff like this for this. That's nuts. That's really cool. But wow, there's a lot of people that actually done that, or maybe it's the same person just really showing that off. So let me try to find one here that actually is the game itself without any extras. It seems like a lot of people really like decking this one out to the nines. There we go. This looks like a decent representation of what it looks like. But again, this is from 2017, so this is probably when it first came out. But there's a lot of tokens, so this leads into my con essentially, and that's In terms of any dungeon crawler, none of them are free of fiddliness to a certain extent. Most of them have a lot going on, a lot to keep track, whether it's on your characters, what's going on in the game, what's going on in the story. So there's a lot of things going on. Usually it takes a game or two before things start moving smoothly, and that is definitely the case with Sword of Sorcery. So you got to give it a couple games to nail down those tokens. What do they mean? When do you use them? When do things cool down? How does that work? All that type of stuff. Once you get those down, the game flows. You will not have issues with it. You'll enjoy the strategy, you'll enjoy the story, and you'll enjoy the choices. Plus, you'll love the fact that every single time when your character actually gets killed, they come back in a ghost form, like a light blue color, and they're still useful on the game board, which I think is super awesome. So again, this is a high recommendation for this one. I still love it, but you can see there is quite a bit going on with this, and but I still enjoy it to this day. So it has slipped down my list, and we'll see where it is next year in relation to everything else, but very excited for the new content that's coming out in the future. Number 9 is Shadows of Brimstone from Flying Frog Productions. This one is one that has latched on to me since the day that I played it. It was literally the first official dungeon crawler that I ever played when I got buried into this solo gaming hobby, and just a hobby in general. This thing put its claws into me, and I've never ever been able to get away from it. I enjoy it still to this day. It's harder to play it currently based on the fact I have some young children that are taking up quite a bit of time, plus the channel, but this is a game that I always have the drive to want to put back on the table for how absolutely immersive and exciting this game can be adventure-wise. It's a dungeon crawler for sure, but the length at which it goes to present you with so many different worlds and themes mixed together in the most wacky way possible, that you can basically have like 10 to 15 different themes going on inside of one game, is mind-blowing. There's lots of dungeon crawlers out there. Most of them are all different themes. It's pretty wild to be able to pick one that has all of them inside of it. That's just insanity. The only downside to this thing is it is a beast in terms of the cost of this thing. So obviously, if you really get into it and get into all the different miniatures and all the different gameplay elements, the miniatures and the gameplay elements justify each other. It is a dungeon crawler, so you have to expect there's going to be minis in it. But the building of them can be where people can stumble sometimes because you do have to build them. The original core sets were much tougher to put together. This is the core set that I would recommend to get now if you're interested, because it's the most recent one, and as things have gone along, the sprues have gotten better, the actual miniatures have gotten better, and all that kind of stuff. But it was interesting to see that this was so high on my list in 2018 in the 4th position, which is really way up there, and now has slipped down to 9. And honestly, if anything, it's not the game that I'm getting tired of. It's probably just the fact that it's a behemoth now, because I own literally almost everything for this thing to get to the table. So the bigger it's becoming, the more of a monstrosity and the harder it is to actually get it out. But when I do get it out, it's like the single most amazing experience in dungeon crawl you could possibly have. The one thing that I have to mention before we move on to the next one is in terms of files, because for solo players, there is a file in here, and I'm going to have to try to see if I can find this relatively quickly. I thought it used to sit pretty high at the top on a HOD, unless it got taken down. If it got taken down, I'll be... Oh, that's right. My apologies. This is actually... I'm going to have to go to the original City of Ancients in order to... bring this up, because I believe this was originally posted in the 2 core sets from way back. Yes, that's Hexcrawl. I've mentioned this one before. If you are going to play this game in any form or fashion, it's great to get the rulebook and the 10 scenarios or so that come inside of this core set when you get going. But I'm telling you right now, please download Hexcrawl and dig into it. Even if you don't have the game, download this zip file, take a look at it. If this doesn't suck you in, then there might be a reason why you don't like dungeon crawlers, because it has everything you could possibly want in creating an experience as a dungeon crawler that's exciting. And it was fan-made, which is even more incredible. It's a community project, so very, very, very cool. So the individual that put this together right here deserves tons of credit. I think him and maybe some others were involved, but predominantly him. And yeah, just everything. Components are involved. There's books to actually print out. There's tokens. There's a Hexcrawl map. They've gone as far as actually creating an overarching game map for Shadows of Brimstone that didn't even exist. So you can literally, go around and it move throughout the hexes. And then when you have a scenario that's built into the scenario book, it's actually tied into one of these mine locations, because that's what you're always doing, is moving into mines. So again, just taking a regular game that has, 10% of what people really wanted inside of it from the get-go, and then turning it into a fully fledged, probably one of the best well-rounded dungeon crawlers there is available to date. And it still moves really, really well in terms of sales, from my understanding, because they still continue to put out Kickstarter after Kickstarter for Shadows of Brimstone non-stop, because it's just an endless hole. You essentially have the ability, because of the portals and the mines, to explore any universe you could possibly imagine. It could be landing in Japan. It could be in a spaceship. It could be in the desert. It could be like, it's really just the limits of your imagination, and the creators have kind of gone that way with it. Super high recommendation for this. You can see it's sitting very high overall, very high thematically. In my opinion, the thematic level should be way higher than this actually states. And you'll also notice that solo players love this thing as well. So definitely a solid 9 list. Has slipped over time, but it's probably due to the fact I don't have the time to play it as often. In the 8th position, we have The Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth. This came out in 2019, so obviously wasn't on the 2018 list, so it's a new entry for this list right now. Came out through Fantasy Flight Games and is thematically rated 22 on Board Game Geek, 136 overall. Weight-wise, it's not as heavy as the last two I just mentioned on the list that were in the 3s and 4s. The weight on this one is so reduced, and this goes back to my con on Sword and Sorcery in terms of its complexity and the need for fiddliness with tokens, reduces a lot of that because it's using an app. The Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth implements similar Dimensions of Madness, of which it is kind of inspired from, an app that basically manages all of those fiddly type things that you don't necessarily really want to spend all your time doing. You still have to manage some of it on your character board, but it's very streamlined, and you're really just dealing with some inspiration tokens and when to use those, as well as mitigating your successes through cards. So in this one, it's a little bit different. You actually do have cards, of course, for your character. You have a character card, your miniatures, and everything like that. And you've got your items you're going to use. But as you go through the adventure, you're going to pull cards from your deck, and there's going to be chances for success. That's how you get successes versus dice, which is you expect. The dice are in Mansions of Madness. This one doesn't have any. You pull cards over, and in this kind of a draw, you'd say, I got 1 success. And you try to put that success towards whatever you're trying to do. These types of emblems right here for inspiration, if you have inspiration tokens sitting in here, you can discard one to actually convert one of these cards to a success. But you can also pull cards in this deck that have neither of these two symbols on them, and because of that, it's just an outright fail, and it's not going to help you towards succeeding. So, do I like this game? Yes, I have tons of fun with this. I played through the entire first campaign solo. I also played through it with a group of friends. I enjoyed it both times. There was different things going on. Different setups occurred. Whether you won scenarios or lost scenarios, things panned out a little differently. The actual storyline still was the same, but there's different story elements that can change. The one thing about the story I didn't like was the fact it wasn't impactful, and the best way I could compare this is Star Wars Imperial Assault. When I first played that game on the app, and this was very early on in Fantasy Flight's app integration game, they basically had, in the very first campaign, and I'm not even joking, I think it was one of the very early scenarios in the game, you're running through with your heroes, and all of a sudden, this is not a spoiler anymore because it's been so long, but Vader appears. And the weight of when he shows up on the board versus all the other stormtroopers you've been dealing with to that point just throws you, because you can't, it's a shock to actually see such a major character arrive on scene in the game. And when he shows up on the board and the things that he can do to you, you realize very quickly that he's not there to be taken out. He's there to be avoided. And like, you're not going to be able to take him out. He's just there to toy with you. But that just added an element to the excitement level of what was going on, knowing that sometime along the way, you're going to be able to try to go after this individual when you get strong enough. And that wasn't as really here with Lord of the Rings. That first campaign had you going after characters I had never even heard of before. So I didn't really care when they showed up on the board. I just said, here's another miniature. Let's just hit him until he's dead. Versus, here's a major character from the movies, let's go after him. Like, that's the kind of thing it was missing, that really gripping kind of thing. Now, I haven't played the second campaign, so that might have something going on there, but again, the miniatures in the box, none of the villains are of major importance. So I think that was a huge miss on their part when they first released it. Really hope that expansions going forward will add that element in, but honestly, if you're looking for a game to introduce to people or gamers who have never played a game before, these app-driven games are perfect because the fiddliness is reduced to almost nothing and you can just enjoy the experience. And then if the individual believes they're having a lot of fun and wants to go deeper, you can introduce games that actually have you controlling everything. So games like Lord of the Rings, Mansions of Madness, fantastic for new solo players. Number 7 on the list is Star Wars Imperial Assault from Fantasy Flight Games. In 2018, this ironically was in the exact same position at number 7, and it hasn't moved for me because I really think that they absolutely nailed Star Wars in terms of its feel and especially how well the app integration works. Now, there's a little bit more work in this one in terms of learning how the AI works inside the game, but I have done a full series of videos going through that very first campaign, at least the first bit of it, enough to give you an idea with the app in your face to show you exactly how to move through all those elements. And once you get a handle on it, you're going to have a lot of fun. There's a bunch here to do. I still enjoy this game to this day, and I still actually believe that the original campaign that was available through the app is far and above better than Journeys in Middle-earth in terms of a very first campaign to get you going, because it's very exciting and it feels like Star Wars, and they just did a fantastic job with it. The only one negative that I would say with this one is that, again, the app integration was very early on in its stages at that point. So because of that, there's some kind of nuances to how the app works, and it's not as good at kind of streamlining the game as you might be used to currently with like Mansions of Madness, for instance. But still, going back, it's one of the best experiences Star Wars-wise I've had in board games. It's one of my favorite games, and even though Fantasy Flight has mentioned recently, that being that it came out in 2014, and it's crazy highly ranked at 14 thematic, 37 overall, it's getting up there in weight, not super high, but above average. Still a great game, still a game people enjoy. This, to me, is something you can completely ignore. Most people don't realize this kind of a rating system on Board Game Geek was thrown in terms of these votes before the app was actually involved in the situation. The app came much later in the years of development, and that allowed for solo and cooperative play. So a lot of those votes saying that it's only a 2 to 5 player game, this really does need to be updated on Board Game Geek to a 1 to 5 player game, because it's really misrepresenting the game completely. And there's people that have not even realized that this game can be played solo. So that is a huge miss right off the top. But Fantasy Flight has stated that they're not going to be releasing any more physical products for the game, but it's a beautiful game. Miniatures are great, tiles are great, feels like Star Wars. The only thing that we might see, if our fingers are crossed and things work out, is maybe more campaigns added to the app. The great thing is you can always download the app without actually buying the game, just to see whether or not the amount of campaigns, the amount of content that's there for you as a solo player is worth your dime at this point in time. But besides that, happy to leave this at number 7. Number 6 is Folklore, the Affliction, comes from Greenbrier Games. This was 5th on the list last time we did this, so it only moved down 1 position, so not too bad. It pretty much held its spot almost, similar to Imperial Assault. Thematically ranked 194, but I honestly think that should be way higher. This thing is very thematic, very immersive, very much one of those memorable type of dungeon crawlers you're going to come back to, or at least remember certain situations that happen to your party as you move through this game. The game is just fantastic from a narrative standpoint. Overall, it's 1,152. I find that quite surprising, actually, because the game rank is actually quite high. So the fact that it's not overall ranked very high still surprises me to this day. So if anything, it starts to fall into the diamond in the rough, but it's not, it's not that rough yet. Like, that overall is still pretty good compared to the thousands of board games that are available, but I think it should be much higher. So this one can be overlooked at times, I think. The one thing I really liked about it was the fact that all the game boards in it are very thin, dynamic, and they also are very glossy. So when you put them on the table, they really shine. These pictures do not do them justice whatsoever. Best way to find that out is just check out my unboxing I did for this game. and you'll be able to actually see some of the contents closer up. And as well, you can also check out videos online to find them too, but they have some beautiful artwork on some of these tiles. The miniatures are great as well, and I'll show you one shot that I thought was really cool. Somebody actually went ahead and painted everything and set it all up. Some people go to the nth degree with scenery. There's a full game map, which I thought is really nice, that kind of intertwines all the areas. So you're moving in these different roads, and they're all broken up in different steps kind of along the way. You got different major areas to go through, town references and stuff like that. So it really does create a story that you're going to want to come back and find out what is going to happen next. And that's what I really thought was cool about it. So it's still sticking pretty high up on my list, and I am excited to see kind of where it goes with the expansion and add-on and stuff. But again, if you're a painter, you're going to love these figures. They look awesome. And just the theming of the game and the setting, in that it's in a kind of a horror setting, as you can see here. Definitely something you should check out. And honestly, this statement pretty much sums it up. You travel the land, enter dark locations where actions becomes a miniature-based dungeon crawl. You're uncovering deeper and more intriguing storylines as you go further into the darkness to drive back the evil into the hell it came from. It just, and the words don't even do it justice. You got to play the game. It's so much fun. The con for this one, in my opinion, is combat is not, not everyone is sold on the combat system for this game. So the combat could have been done better from the original game, 100%. It's not terrible, but it's not as good as it could have been. And I think that's its weakness. So if you're looking for a con, because like I said before, most games have them. And if they don't have one that's known, then someone's not telling the truth, because I don't think there's a perfect game out there. But that one for Folklore for me is definitely the combat being a little bit wonky, but I definitely overlook that and can easily play it and still have lots of fun in the combat because of how great the narrative storytelling and those events and those exciting moments that crop up in it. Number 5 is Cthulhu Death May Die. Came out in 2019 from Rob Davio and Eric Lang. Again, this one wasn't out in 2018, so it's obviously not on the prior list. Solo play is in there. It's strategically ranked 406, thematically 92. It's overall 706, so pretty good numbers for a brand new entry. This comes from Simon Games. You might be saying, no, stop, it's come on. I will not do it. You can't force me. I don't care. I'm going to keep calling them Simon until they change it back. So that essentially is, and this essentially is, the surprise hit, in my opinion, of 2019. This is the game that I looked at and thought, it could be good, it could be terrible. I have no idea what to expect. The premise of the game was pretty simple. It's in the final couple hours. Everything's gone to hell. There's basically an Elder One that's going to come out. You've got to take that thing down. And you've got dice rolling going on in here. So really, you're just trying to take down a big bad. Sounds like it has the recipe for what could be a very boring game or a game that is very, very repetitive. I'm telling you right now, if you thought that and you skip past the Kickstarter because of it, you've made a grave error. This particular game has some of the coolest scenario by scenario changes that I've seen in any dungeon crawler to this point. And the fact that what you mix as an Elder God with your scenario really does intricately change the mechanics of what you're playing, to the point where your strategy needs to change every single time you pair a new Elder God with that particular scenario. So you could play scenario 1 with Cthulhu, trying to take Cthulhu down, and he might throw fire at you and a number of other different things to go on, and then you play the exact same episode number 1 and you pair it with a different Elder God, and you have a whole new slew of mechanics and different things are going to change, and strategy that's going to be forced upon you to have to deal with to win. I love that, because really what it means is you can play the same scenario many, many, many times, but have so many different angles to deal with strategically. And that is a brilliant design, because it allows for really a lot of expandability, because if they decide to come back to this in the future and add more content into the game, say in a different Kickstarter, even though there's already a ton, just a single Elder God add-on to this particular product instantly makes every single previous episode replayable one more time. We're talking like, if there's 15 to 16 episodes in the original Kickstarter and one Elder God gets released, that is a crazy amount of additional replayability for a game just because of that release. So the structure and the base that they've created this game on is brilliant. And they need to continue doing stuff like that, because that is a winning formula in terms of not only appeasing the individuals who put the money in to support the product, but also the availability for the game to expand in the future. So I'm really hoping that with the success of the Kickstarter and how many people really enjoyed it and are just as surprised with how great of a game it is and how much fun it truly is. And that's the key word about this one. I could go on and on about the mechanics of the game and how it works, but the key value here is it's actually just pure fun. You're going to have a blast playing this game, and there's many dungeon crawlers that you play waiting for moments where things are going to be fun. This thing is fun from start to finish. It's very enjoyable on the way. So what am I hoping for this? I'm really hoping that, like I said, the retail copies seem to be doing really well. I've seen lots of posts online of people saying like that they're picking it up after the Kickstarter because they've released some of these boxes to retail. A majority of the stuff actually went to retail, allowing people that didn't get the Kickstarter to get a majority of the game, which was a smart choice on them because it allows the game to expand well beyond the Kickstarter, which again means that if they were to ever run a second Kickstarter, the amount of support would probably double easily, and there's so much room for it to really grow and expand. So really hope that this isn't their first foray into HP Lovecraft, because I think they nailed it in adding something different, something new that wasn't being done before. And I really like that element of, hey, it's the final hour, we all know we're screwed and we got to take this thing down, versus the old school way of doing it, which is we're investigators, we got to find out what's going on. Oh wait, things are going to hell, now we should do something. This thing skips past all of that investigative stuff right to that final couple hours and gives you all the excitement in one action-packed scenario, which I think is just awesome. Number 4 is Middara, Unintentional Malum Act 1. This one is also a new entry for the list, coming out in 2019 from Succubus Publishing. Thematically, 192 and 1,345 overall. Weight-wise, it's almost ticking up to a 4, and I gotta show you guys this because it's absolutely insane. The box is huge. First off, it's a coffin-style box. There is a ton of components inside of this thing, and there's a couple shots here where it actually shows you those components. Here's a good shot right here. This is nuts. This is an insane amount of content, and I don't know if you can see this right here, but I will do my best here. But you can see right there, that book right there, that's like, you know, I don't know, 8 times to 10 times the size of every other rule book and stuff around it. Yeah, that book is actually the storybook behind the game itself, which is just nuts. So again, this game has delivered from the original Kickstarter, which took years to develop. In 2019, it landed, people started playing it, and then they put out a reprint for not only the first edition, or the first core again, with some updated rules, but also 2 additional acts to add even more content if you weren't satisfied with the crazy amount that comes in the first one. So if you're looking for a game similar to some of the largest games in the hobby to date, like Gloomhaven for instance, this is one you're going to want to take a look at. What does it do differently from games like Gloomhaven? Well, first off, the theming's very different. The con could be that you may not be into that theme or that style. If you're not, then it's a pass for you. If you are and you're cool with it, that's good, because it actually is something that's not as overly done in terms of a dungeon crawler. Lots of dungeon crawlers go down the fantasy, medieval knight, that kind of vibe. This is a little different. It's actually quite a lot different. And on top of it, if you actually head to Succubus Publishing's website, they have full videos that'll show you the story as to why this world exists, how it exists, what are the rules within it, and you know, just it gives you kind of the prequel information, not the prequel, but the history behind how the game got to where you're currently playing. How did the world get to the state it currently is in, and why should you care about these characters that you're playing? So that's cool, because it gives you something that not a lot of board games do very well. Usually they give you a couple pages on a rule book and they say, well, this is your intro, and you should, you know, use your imagination to fill in the blanks. They go really detailed in the videos on their site. Definitely go check those out. But yeah, this is the content list out. Tons of stuff, miniatures, lots of miniatures. Tokens wise, it actually is one thing that this thing surprised me, is that The majority of this game is based in cards, and there's tiles, for, of course, for the different things, but some of the stuff is actually like hidden information that you shouldn't know until you get there. So a bunch of it you're going to put back in the box because you're not going to touch until the game tells you to. And then some of the tiles you won't be using, some of the cards you won't be using. So eventually you realize that like 1/4 of this is used to play the game, and you'll notice there's not that many tiles. So when you're playing the game, it's not one of those fiddly games where you have 3,000 bajillion different tokens and you're trying to figure out what's for what. They did a pretty good job streamlining that for such a massive endeavor. So props to them for that. One other thing you'll notice on these boards is you'll see there's UV spotting. So the boards look like most games do, but then there's certain aspects of these boards where they'll go the extra mile to make them look super glossy and nice, to kind of pinpoint really exciting parts of the tile, like water, for instance. And it just adds a nice professional touch that not a lot of dungeon crawlers have. So here's a beautiful look at it. You can see like get some gems here. Some of the greenery in these caves is kind of highlighted. The water is obviously highlighted in certain areas. And you can see there's reflections here going on the tile. So kind of hard to see it all, but there is UV spotting along the way. Some people organize the game. Definitely recommend that. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is actually, yes, this is a linked adventure. So inside of my videos that I did, this is actually what allows you to play with multiple characters and have a full party of 4 without having to manage fully 4 full characters, which could be an insane drain on a solo player. So you can control 2 full characters and then link those 2 to one of these characters each, so that you basically just have to deal with only this for each of those 2 linked characters, which is super easy to do. And then bam, you've got a party of 4 to go into the adventure with. Pretty smart. Again, long story short, very, very, very in-depth world. Very big, very large. The development cycle on this thing was actually in tandem with Gloomhaven in terms of when it released. I think it was actually in development potentially before Gloomhaven. It came out after Gloomhaven, obviously, and I think if it had come out before, it would have been potentially and might have gotten all the attention that Gloomhaven would have gotten. But it took a little bit longer for it to come out, and thankfully it's worth it. Like an 8.8 is a pretty solid average score. Like that is, we're talking some serious numbers. I don't think I've seen a dungeon crawler on the list yet that's hit that number. So this is impressive all the way around. In the number 3 position, we have Gloomhaven from 2017. Isaac Childress created this thing, this monstrosity of a game. Very well known, very well received. We have talked about Gloomhaven many times on this channel, and it's been basically beat to death with success for the handful of years it's been out now. It's very well received. You can see Board Game Geek has it as overall 1, thematic 1, strategy 1. It's a great game to try if you are a solo gamer and you've never played it. Now, what is it going to do differently than other dungeon crawlers? Well, it eliminates completely the dice aspect of things. So you're going to have a handful of cards as a particular character, and on your turn, you're going to go ahead and not only be looking at the initiative value in the middle as to, determining whether you want to go kind of, early, middle, or late in terms of your turn order, which again, you won't really know if you're playing with others, but if you're playing solo, you're kind of setting yourself up, or you're setting certain characters up to go first over other ones. So that's one aspect to think of. And then on top of that, you have to pick the top action of one card and the bottom action of another. So that has you working with all these up and down kind of synergies where you're going, well, do I want to do this first and then this, or do I want to do this first and then this? You can't do the same action on the same card. You have to do kind of the top of one card, bottom of the other. And when you have a handful of cards, sounds easy, but there's actually quite a bit of thinking going on in terms of what you want to accomplish on that given turn. That is really one of the biggest, coolest factors of Gloomhaven that it introduced that I absolutely love. They nailed that, and Isaac did a really good job of it when he implemented it. There is an element of fiddliness to Gloomhaven because of its gargantuan size. There's lots of tokens, there's lots of tracking of health, and some of it's a little bit archaic. Like, to be completely honest, some of it needs an update. And so in order to kind of trim that down, they've released an app in order to actually go ahead, and this is actually the design of the game here, Isaac. They have an app design that I think will take care of a majority of the fiddly management of some of the stuff going on. So that reduces things. There's also something out there which I think is very, very useful. It's a third-party app, and what it does is it takes a scenario book, which is, this is one of the cons that I have for Gloomhaven, which I haven't spoken to too much, if at all, on the channel yet, but this is something that I think is worth mentioning. It's a campaign-based game where you have a character, and that character has this hidden agenda as they're a mercenary, and they may retire once they kind of once they've gotten their goal complete. And then that's at that point in time, it allows you to unlock a new character, which is another whole interesting grab at Gloomhaven, is you're not stuck with the same character for the 90 plus scenarios in the game. You're going to go through multiple characters as you venture through the story. So that's cool too. That's very different than most campaign games where you stick with the same character through almost all of it, if not the entire thing. So the reason I wanted to mention that is the fact that as you're controlling one of these characters and they are retiring, you're going to go ahead and you're going to be looking through these scenarios in the book, and you're going to be setting up all these individual scenarios as you go through your campaign. What the book does that I think is very weak, and some of these pictures don't do it justice at the moment, because some of these are some individuals putting some serious time into some extra stuff here. But there are pictures here that you can find of the actual scenario book and the layout of what's on the scenario book page, and this might show it here. Yes, this is actually a perfect example. So here's the Black Barrel scenario, the #1 scenario that you set up from the beginning of the game. And you'll notice something about this is quite odd, in my opinion. It's a dungeon crawler, but yet not only is the layout completely open and available for you to see, but literally everything, the chest that's super special, is sitting right there. Doesn't tell you necessarily what's in the chest. That is the only thing that's hidden on this entire scenario, is what's in the chest. That's on a separate page at the back. Everything else tells you exactly what type of enemy, where they're standing, where all the gold coins are, and all this stuff, where the traps are. But the funny thing is, when you set up the dungeon, you only set up the first tile where your heroes show up, and you put a door here. You're not supposed to go ahead and populate these 2 tiles. You're supposed to put the tiles down, so you set up all 3 tiles on the table, but this is the only one you populate. These other 2 are blank until you crack this door. So what's hilarious about this is the fact that you literally, if you're one player, if you're playing this solo, this is the downside. You're going to see everything. It's going to ruin it for you. The second you go ahead to set up the game, you're already spoiling it, and it's really hard to avert your eyes away from all the detail that's sitting right there in your face to say, oh, that's where the end boss is going to be sitting. Oh, that's where the beautiful treasure box is going to be sitting in the corner. So that was a huge negative for me, but a third-party individual went ahead and put together an app that actually hides all the parts of this book, and has what he did essentially, or she did, I don't know who actually created it, but essentially they blocked off certain areas. So they basically went ahead and they said, well, you should read this introduction text first. So they put a big red box over it with a 1. And then they blocked off the next area you need to focus on, which is probably this area here for setup. And they put a 2 here. So basically you click on this, read the intro, then click on this and go, oh, I'm supposed to set this up. And then it would even kind of let you know, like, you don't need to go any farther than this until you actually open the door type thing. So basically it prevents you from accidentally seeing things that honestly shouldn't be in the book in the first place. The reason why Gloomhaven is slipping down the track for me is other dungeon crawlers on this list are doing some of these things better. They're doing a better job at the narrative. The narrative is not this thin. Each of these scenarios only offer this much narrative, whereas games like Middara offer pages upon pages of narrative that give super involved understanding of what's going on and why, whereas these are quite thin, so that's a negative. And the other negative is, again, information is way too available, whereas in Middara, as another great example, they actually use a red decoder to keep some of this stuff hidden until you're allowed to see it. So certain things like this, that this only triggers down here, that piece of information will only trigger if you happen to go through a particular door that has that number. But you can see it while you're setting it up, so you're already kind of trying to avoid looking at it. Plus you can technically see what's behind the door anyway. So it ruins it. And so you really do need that third-party app if you want to play this solo and not have those surprises of the campaign be spoiled for you by you accidentally just seeing them. So that's a huge miss in my opinion, especially in a campaign game, and it's one that hasn't been fixed officially yet. And so until they do that, I'm going to continue to kind of harp on that one as a big negative. But besides that, the game is the best bang for buck dungeon crawler you can possibly buy. That I've continued to say over the years. Fantastic, fantastic game, designed very well, and it is a lot of fun. I've played a ton of it. In the second position, and still in the second position from the list in 2018, is Mansions of Madness. And I absolutely love this game. It just gets better and better with time, the more expansions that get added. And you can see here overall it's ranked 30, thematically ranked 9. Again, the app does such a good job of being a perfect balance between the amount of time you spend looking at the app versus what you spend on the table. It doesn't take away from the experience, it only enriches and adds to it. And it's honestly, again, if you're into mysteries and intrigue and trying to figure out what's going on, and then of course just full on chaos, because some of these missions actually evolve into that, it's really, really good. And it's also a really great solo game. All of these are, they're on the list, but this one's really good if you want that immersion when you're playing by yourself, because there's a lot of board games where there's not music involved, there's not a very involved story, or the story you're kind of trying to tie it into your, use your own head to kind of, imagine and put yourself in those shoes. The Mansions of Madness app does a lot of that for you to kind of get you in the mood by having that cool intro that kind of gives you a nice narrative and voice acting into what's going on and how did this, get to where it's at. And then once you're in the particular game, how is this whole story unfolding? It's a mystery, and it's just exciting when you're playing it from a solo angle. Again, if you're brand new to showing the board games in general, this is a great option. And then on top of it, if you're actually introducing anyone to board games, this is a perfect game, along with Journeys in Middle-earth. Two great options for a very low-key game that's not going to be a ton of management, especially if you have one person that knows how to play the game. The rest of the people at the table are set and ready to go. This is a high recommendation and still currently sits at my number 2. And the number 1 solo dungeon crawler on the list is Kingdom Death Monster. And this game, as of 2018, was actually in the 3rd position and has creeped its way up to number 1. The more I spend time with this game, the more I love it. There are certain aspects of this game that are beyond creepy, and again, the cool nature with this game is you can kind of take it as far as you want to take it. It is a very aggressive and mature game. There's a lot going on, but this is a game that initially a lot of people, as I mentioned in the past, said, hey, lots of miniatures doesn't make a great game. Well, in this case, a lot of miniatures actually make a fantastic game if the actual game system is even better than the miniature quality itself. That's what you get with Kingdom Death Monster. Yes, it's a massive investment, but the actual quality of what you get in the end is literally grail type material. You're talking a game that is going to sit on your shelf and be kind of a prized possession, but not just something to stare at, not just a pretty box on the shelf. The gameplay is amazing. There's a lot of individuals that have been inspired from this particular gameplay as well. One that most recently came out on Kickstarter last year was Aeon's Trespass, and they very closely modeled their style after Kingdom Death Monster, almost a little too closely, to the point where like even the setup of cards and the picture of everything on the table looked like the promotional stuff for Kingdom Death Monster from the beginning. Like there's other game companies that are looking at this now going like, oh, this was not a flash in the pan. This is a game that actually had some serious substance, and we assume that the $400 was because the miniatures look cool, not because the game was actually any good. This thing is really, really good. And the crazy thing about it is you can buy just the core box for the really high price that it is, and that will keep you busy for a long time. You don't need to get all the expansions, and if you want or you don't want certain expansions, because some of them are a little more graphic than others, you can pick and choose your expansions. The first core box is pretty tame in terms of what it presents, in terms of its maturity level. It's not too aggressive, but there are expansions that are very, very mature rated. But again, you can just look at those particular expansions and say, I'll exclude that particular one, or buy it and proxy it in with something else. There's nothing saying you can't use another, for instance, there might be a particular monster in this game that you don't jive with, but you might have that same monster in a different board game. You can proxy it in. Or if you're playing this game and you have a family around or something, you don't want some of these giant monstrosities out in the open. But if that's not an issue for you, or you don't have that problem and you're just like, I'm playing a game because I enjoy it and I don't care because it's completely fine, throw it on the table because it is beautiful. It's crazy, it's off the wall, and the designs as it goes along get even more wacky and ridiculous, but My experience has been heavily with the core and very little with the expansions so far. I've got them opened, but I haven't had the time to actually start diving into the expansions yet. But the core is enough to keep me busy just with the channel involved as well, and I've really loved it. Cannot wait to actually start building the expansions out and adding them in too. But yes, this is definitely my number one. If I was thinking of a dungeon crawler that I want to sit down and actually play through, it weaves elements of not only an epic fights with bosses, with a settlement that you're creating, and you're trying to upkeep that settlement. There's always panic inside of you in terms of, well, if I bring these particular survivors that I built up and I really love and they're so great and they go into this battle, they can die and they will never come back again, including everything you've done to get them to that point. It's a very unforgiving game, but it's very satisfying when you win. So definitely highly recommend Kingdom Death Monster. This one, again, used to be lower on my list, and it just has creeped up and up. And you can see it's from 2015, so it's got some age attached to it now. It's getting up there. 5 years in board games is actually like it's kind of like dog years. It's actually like the games go out of style pretty fast because so much new stuff is coming out. But yeah, like this thing is definitely maturing and you know, well, with age. It's actually, you know, becoming more popular, I think, as people go on with this. So anyway, long story short, you want to find more information with that, I've got some unboxing on the channel and things like that. I haven't actually done a showcase of this on the channel yet. That is a crazy undertaking if I tried to pull that off. If I get time, I would love to. I'd love to go to the nth degree and make some kind of really cool showcase to show it off. I think I will at some point. Can't promise when that's going to happen because my current life right now involves me with a new son within the next couple days. To be totally honest, my wife is due in 2 days from the recording of this video, so I'm going to have a really busy life. So Kingdom Death Monster is going to probably take a back seat for quite some time, but yeah, this is one that's going to be sticking around on my shelf for quite some time to come. So that is going to wrap up the top 10 solo dungeon crawlers, and I really hope you enjoyed this video. Again, you can always check out my prior one in 18 to kind of bounce where things moved. I mentioned a lot of that as I went through. Definitely let me know in the comments below, what were your top 10, or what are your top 10 in general, because that's what we're doing here. What are your top 10 in general? It doesn't matter what year, just your top 10 solo dungeon crawlers of all time. What are they? Because I'm really curious to know. Thank you guys so much, and as always, keep on rolling solo.